So we will move on to our presentations. And our first presentation this evening will be about trustee area boundary adjustment. Following comprehensive study and community input, the district transitioned to a by-trustee area election method in 2014. Education Code Section 5019.5 requires that the district adjust trustee area boundaries so they are proportional to the number of trustees and overall population of the district based on the decennial federal census. I will refer the rest of this presentation to Carl Waddell.
Thank you, Trustee Piercy. Tonight we're happy to welcome the team that will be assisting the district. Mr. Justin Rich from Cooperative Strategies is here and he'll present to you. I'd like to welcome him up to the podium. With him is Michael Toy. He's an attorney with Parker Covert who's also assisting tonight.
I got it.
Got it.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here tonight. As was discussed, we're here to come back, and after 8 years now, when the trustee areas were originally adopted, we're going to review based on the 2020 census data to see both the demographics and the population balance for your trustee areas. And I think there's a couple of key things that as demographers, when we went through your data, there's a couple of things that stood out to us. First of all, there's been overall population growth within the district of 3.3%. So that's from 2010 to 2020. And there's also been some shifts in terms of the demographics of the district, and probably not surprising for you all that live in the community, and so we'll highlight some of those. What we see based on our analysis, and we'll talk more about this, but the key under Education Code 5019.5, what we're supposed to do is make sure that after the census that trustee areas are roughly in balance. So what we look at, you'll see in I guess it's the fifth column here where it shows the variance. The variance between the smallest and the largest trustee area is 9%. And generally we're shooting for under 10%, so I think that's good news. You'll see that trustee area 1 is the smallest, and it has a variance of negative 4.1% below that ideal size. And trustee area 2 is the largest, about 4.8% above the ideal size or average. I will say also that the deadline for completing this process is February 28, 2022. That's a few months away, and again, that's if necessary, that's if the board decides to make any adjustments to the maps. So I've provided a snapshot here based on the 2020 census data, and this shows the demographic composition of the district based on that new data. We've showed both the total population and also, for reference, the age 18 and over population. You'll see that now your total population is just shy of 400,000. And it shows that your largest protected class, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, is the Latinx group, and at 47.6%. When we talk about protected classes, this is as defined by the Federal Voting Rights Act. These are racial and language minority groups. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about how that factors into drawing boundaries. We've also shown the citizen voting age population. And for those that can recall the last process, the relevance of that is to make sure that we're looking at not just the total number of people, which is what the census counts and what we showed, but also to look at who are the likely eligible voters, and this is prepared by the American Community Survey, the 2015 through 2019 citizen voting age population. And so these numbers obviously are smaller than the total population, but this is a proxy that we use to determine who's likely to vote in an election. Again, the largest protected class is the Latinx group at just about 38%. Just by means of orientation here, we've included the current trustee areas, the map that you adopted previously. For reference, and I think that this was a key highlight of the last process, is just to overlay the high school attendance boundaries on this. So you'll see the red lines show the various high school attendance boundaries. And, excuse me, the colored areas show the current trustee areas. It's probably a little hard to see exactly what those are. Area 1 is in yellow, Area 2 is in green, Area 3 is in red, Area 4 is in blue, and Area 5 is sort of a pink color. So on this slide, I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, when we're looking at variance, I talked about that earlier. When we're looking at variance, this is really just a fairly simple math problem. We take the total population and we divide that by the number of trustee areas, and that gives us our average or our ideal size. And then when we're calculating the variance, what we do is we take the largest and we take the smallest, and we calculate what the difference is, and then we divide that by that ideal size. That gives us our variance in terms of percentage. Again, I pointed out that Area 1 is the smallest in terms of total population, and 2 is the largest in terms of total population. Those are the colors, or the columns, I should say, that are lightly colored. And then in the darker columns, we've included the percentages of the citizen voting age population as well. As was the case when you originally adopted these boundaries, you have a majority Latinx group based on citizen voting age population of just about 56%. That's up from, I had it here, it was roughly 52% if I remember correctly previously, so that's grown. And you are close to having a majority, but you have a plurality of Latinx voters, again, based on citizen voting age population in trustee area 2. Again, the total variance, looking at the total population, is just about 9%. And so, as demographers, when we're looking at drawing these areas, there's a number of different considerations that go into that. And I'll categorize those two ways. There's things that we must do in order to comply with the law, and then there's other things that we should do based on stuff that is in the California Education Code, and we should do to the extent possible. But it also represents good, keeping communities together, good representation, and I think that's the idea behind these. So in that first category, the things that we must do is we must roughly balance each area. And they will not be and won't, they won't be perfect, but they will be roughly balanced. And again, we take that to mean based on legal precedents that anything less than 10% kind of gives you the safe harbor. So that's the first thing we have to do. The second thing we have to do is we have to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act. And that means that we will not draw areas such that it impairs the ability of a protected class to elect the candidate of their choice. You may be familiar with the terms packing and cracking. We wouldn't want to draw areas such that it diminish the influence of one of these protected classes by either grouping them together in a way that kept them from having their full voice heard in another area, or drawing it such that it split those protected classes and diminished it that way. So that's another thing that we must comply with. We should also keep them as compact and contiguous as much as possible. Sometimes these things can be a balancing act when we have varying degrees of population density and communities and neighborhoods and things like that, but to the extent we can, we should. We should also respect communities of interest, and in this context, we define that as groups that have shared social and economic characteristics. This could be groups based on national origin or religion or other things of that nature. Oftentimes, the boundaries for those communities of interest may be natural or man-made geographic boundaries, whether it's major roads or highways or railroad tracks, things like that. So we should also take that into consideration. Those often make logical choices for dividing lines. And to the extent we can, and this shouldn't be a predominant concern, but we should also respect incumbency to the extent that we can. There's other local considerations, and although I wasn't involved the entire process, I do recall when you drew your boundaries previously, there was thought about the high school attendance boundaries, so that might be something that you would consider, or other factors that make sense for your community and for your role providing K-12 education. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions, and if I can't answer them, I'm sure Mike will be able to answer any of the legal questions.
Do I have any questions from board members? Anne Marie, Mrs. Trejo.
So just bottom line, even though there was a growth in trustee area 2, we're still in compliance because you said it's under the 10%.
Yeah, that's correct. There's a legal presumption, excuse me, that below 10%, and this is based on federal voting rights or federal voting law cases, that if you're below 10%, you're still roughly balanced, and there may be rationales as to why you might not be. Again, we can't be perfectly balanced across the board, but yeah, if you're below 10%, I think most would tell you that you're in a good spot.
Is there a should? Is there a should? And if there is, what would that percentage be?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's aspects of the boundaries currently that you would want to look at, that, maybe there is a community that is being split, or there's a neighborhood that's being split, and that's something that is concerning, then I think this would be the time to address that. Really, that section of the education code is just to ensure that you're within balance, and so that's the purpose of this. And again, based on that criteria, you are in balance, but as a board, you have the option to address other things if you want.
This was a very arduous process, and this was we were really pleased with our balance, and so yeah.
Okay.
It's just nice to see that we have maintained a pretty good balance, generally speaking, that we haven't gone way one way or the other. So thank you for your report.
You're welcome.
So I have a few questions. So I see that we're obviously under the variance of 10%, we're meeting that. But looking at the growth model, right? Growth of District 2 and looking at District 1 because of the decrease in growth, would it be, I wouldn't say, not legally, but would it be a good advice to take a look at the districts and maybe redraw the maps just so that we are ready for, 10 years from now, right? That we're not overbalancing ourselves by District 2 exploding in population, because it makes a big difference. I've been looking at the Anaheim City maps, right? And we see where the growth is in the Platinum Triangle area. There's a possibility that could increase. So my question to you is that, is it advisable for us to take a look at it now, since we're in the process, and redraw the boundaries at least to balance out? In this case, it would be, I don't see any difference in 4 and 5, but maybe 1, 2, and 3, adjust the boundaries a little bit so that it makes sense to get that without compromising any of the other numbers.
Yeah, I think that's a question that you all have to consider and weigh. Again, do the boundaries work well currently? Are there areas where we could make some slight adjustments to bring those more into balance. To your point, I think that's, completely valid to look into the future and know that there's going to be a certain amount of growth that's still coming in those areas, and to plan accordingly. The good thing is that you are going to address this every 10 years, and so you will have those opportunities to rebalance in the future, but, that's a long period of time as well. So
what would be the process? So we're right now, you're giving us a presentation of it,
yep.
and let's say that you come back at the direction of the board to say, look at different models of the map again, or if the board decides, no, I think we're meeting all the criteria, so we don't want to move forward, then this ends today, right?
Certainly, yeah.
So let's say we do give direction to go back and take a look at the maps. What would it be like to open up the process in terms of not only the board, but the community getting involved?
Yeah, and there's nothing that's laid out in statute. There's no legal requirement about how you approach that. I think there's a lot of school districts, the way that they're approaching it is they're holding public hearings. If they go through that process of redrawing maps and inviting the community in, they're using their information resources, their website, social media in order to get the word out there. Some opt for holding community meetings, and so there's really a wide spectrum of how folks approach that.
And I'm just looking at the process at the city and the county. We have enough time to do all that before the February deadline, correct?
Yeah, it depends how we would sequence it, just in terms of when those board meetings would happen where you would review maps and how many meetings would be required and how many iterations we would go through. So, yeah, I think that's a...
So my question to Carl, what happens after tonight's presentation? After this discussion, does a board member make the motion to say, go back and come back, or open up the process to redraw maps, or?
Tonight's meeting was really just informational to explain the data. It was released 2 weeks ago. We're starting the process. It's only an information item. I don't know if Mr. Toy wants to maybe explain what the legal process would be for next steps, but we will go and have a discussion about this, and then if we're going to move further, which we may want to do, we'll backwards map it from the deadline.
Good evening, Board President Percy and members of the board. As cooperative strategies laid out, for school districts, the procedures that the school board wants to follow is very open. Cities and counties are under a statutory scheme. So if you direct staff to say that you want to follow a particular procedure that one of the constituent cities in Anaheim follows, you may follow it, you do not have to follow it. You can listen to what feedback you get. If you take a look at what we did in 2014, there was a particular section of your website that was set up. You published all of the data on your website, and then on your website, if you decided that maybe one or more community hearings would be feasible, you can do that. If you want to have a public hearing, if you direct cooperative strategies to publish one or more draft maps, there is no legal requirement, but we do recommend that you give at least 7 days notice of putting the map up on your website so that the community can respond to it. Just remember that the cities and counties are under a tighter deadline than school boards are. The cities and counties, I believe, are probably have to do this by January. So there's going to...
primary election?
Yeah, with the primary election, they're under a tighter process, so you as a board can take a look at what's happening with the city and perhaps the constituent elementary school districts to see
Right.
what they're doing. There's going to be plenty of time between now and February the 28th in order to do that.
Are we stuck to that February 28th deadline?
Yes,
Because- okay.
you are. The Ed Code says that if the school board, the local school board, does not take action to adjust its trustee area boundaries, the County Office of Education and the County Committee on School District Organization have the ability to do it on their own. Unlike the procedure that we undertook in 2014, where the board received a number of maps, picked a particular map that they wanted to go with, and then submit that to the County Committee on School District Reorganization. That procedural step does not take place this time. It's totally within the discretion of the board between now and February the 28th to consider any adjustments to the boundaries if the board wants to.
Okay.
Thank you for answering that, because I thought that this process took a really long time, and if we don't have to do that,
Yes, the procedures for moving from at-large to by trustee areas is set forth in statute, but once you've moved from at-large to trustee area elections, it's pretty much within the board's discretion in order to how to do that. And if you remember, if there are members of the board who ran for election before 2014, you had to run at large, and so there was a lot more shoe leather. I don't know if people still do that or if everybody does it by Facebook nowadays, but for the 5 trustees, before they used to have to run throughout the district, now it's within the trustee area boundaries, so it's a much a simpler way of campaigning.
Yes.
All right, well, I'm done with the questions, but I would like the board to entertain maybe coming back and at least taking a look at redrawing the maps just to make sure that we're balancing out certain trustee areas. So that's
Yes,
just my opinion.
and moving back from that February the 28th deadline, we've been telling our clients that you should publish at least 7 days before the February the 28th if you want to make any adjustments, so staff can take a look at your, the board schedule, February the 28th, what's the first or second meeting of February, and then work backwards from that. Or you can move quicker, but, I would suggest that as a starting point for staff to give you some options, and then the board can make a decision as if what procedures you want to undergo in order to get the map adjusted if necessary.
I just kind of take exception to a deadline. I think it's still a little bit early, but, we're just getting this data from the census. So I find that, objectionable.
Well, it was unfortunate that the census data was late this year.
About 6 months late.
Yeah, about 6 months late. It would have been nice if the people up in Sacramento had given, some more time.
More time.
But from February the 28th, the steps that has to happen is that those maps have to go to the registrar of voters, and then they've got to figure, in 2014, when people were elected at large, it was very easy. Once you moved to by trustee areas, it created a lot of logistical steps for the registrar of voters. You could be in one area for Anaheim Union, you could be in a separate area for the city council, you could be in a separate area for your feeder elementary school district. And, you know, before it was everybody was at large, it was very simple for the registrar of voters. Now, they really need the February 28th date in order to make sure that they can do a June election as well as a November election.
All right. Thank you for explaining that, and thank you for telling us that it was 6 months. So our public understands that we have to get this done pretty quickly. Thank you.
Okay, and I think cooperative strategies, as I said, you're within the Ed Code 5019.5 now in terms of the, you know, the population. So that's the baseline that your district is starting from.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.